in addition to actually just seeing information on the computer, the BIOS actually gives us the ability to change, to configure these particular components of the computer in our BIOS. Now, this is going to be saved on our CMOS, so of course the CMOS battery comes in play when we want to make sure that that information remains saved. And we can go in, and one of the first things that we can see is we can change things like our boot configuration. Our boot configuration is essentially the order where we want our computer to start up from. Let's say we have a standard desktop computer. It has a USB port in it, a CD drive, and it's pre-installed with Windows 8. Well, when we turn on our computer, the first thing that it is typically going to start up to, without any other interference from us, is going to be Windows 8. This means the first thing in the boot order is the hard drive. Now, let's say we don't want Windows 8 anymore. We're going to install a Linux variant, and we have a CD for Ubuntu. And we want to place that CD inside the computer, and we want it to start up to that instead. So we open it up, put it in, restart our computer, but we're still getting the hard drive, or we're still getting our Windows 8 because that's what's installed in the hard drive. Well, that means that the very first thing installed on our BIOS, or saved on our BIOS, as being the very first order of operation of our operating system is the hard drive. So even if we put a CD in there, it's still going to default to the hard drive as long as there's one in it for it to start up. Now, rather than removing the hard drive and trying to insert a CD and trying to get it to boot from there, what we can actually do is we can go into our BIOS and we can change this order however much we want. We can make it hard drive and then CD, or we could switch those around just as easily. USB actually also comes into play, because you can install operating systems on USBs and run them from there. So those can be moved around as we like, and sometimes they may not even be available or currently turned on, such as PXE booting. PXE booting is also what's known as network booting. It's when you say you're working as a tech support for a big company and you are trying to turn on a computer and trying to connect it out to the network to re-image it from a server that hosts imaging files. The way that you're going to do that is by PXE booting. You're going to turn on that computer, it's going to go out and ask for where the imaging server is, and it's going to receive that information and connect to that server for the operating system. That may be disabled sometimes by default on computers, and we have to go into the BIOS to enable that. And if we want that to be our first option, we would have to, of course, again switch that all around. So this was just a quick rundown on how we can actually change our boot order through our BIOS. So we've seen how to change our boot order in our BIOS, and we're going to also go through enabling and disabling devices. Now, enabling and disabling devices essentially means the input-output devices that are attached to our computer, maybe our external USB ports, the certain sound cards or disk drives. Those can all be turned on or turned off through our BIOS. Again, it's just going to be a simple starting up the computer, hitting F2, and going through our different BIOS options in order to find where we want to enable or disable those. So our input and output devices we can enable and disable. We can also change our Wake on LAN. Well, what does Wake on LAN mean? Well, let's say you need to remotely access a computer that's currently turned off, or the computer turned off because of a power issue and didn't come back on automatically. You can enable Wake on LAN in order to remotely tell that computer essentially it's time to wake up, even if it's turned off. If it's connected into the power and it has an Ethernet cable going into it, and the Wake on LAN is enabled, you can tell that computer to turn on remotely. But of course, again, that needs to be enabled in the BIOS. Other things we can change in the BIOS are date and time, and we can also change our CPU clock speeds. Now, our CPU clock speeds, we don't want to adjust those too much unless we're interested in, say, overclocking or changing performance on our computer. Now, this isn't something that you would have just a standard person just going in and, oh, let's turn up our CPU clock speeds, we'll get a faster computer. Well, that can also result in other problems, overheating issues, melting CPU boards. So that's really for intensive using. Sometimes gaming users can do this in order to get faster performance on their computer, faster processing speeds. But this requires a lot of research beforehand and a lot of specific research as far as your individual CPU goes and the individual motherboard handling can go. We could clock up our CPU speeds but not have proper ventilation in our computer, not have enough cooling, and it's going to turn off every 2 seconds because it's going to overheat. And also we can adjust virtualization. Now, what I mean by virtualization there are programs or applications that allow you to host multiple computers inside one computer. VMware, VirtualBox, Hyper-V are all applications which can be used on your computer, and you can have more computers running on your computer. We'll get into the actual specifics of virtualization later, but one thing you need to know now is if you have virtualization support turned off in your BIOS, you may not be able to actually run those virtual boxes inside of your computer. Now, we can't turn that on from our operating system, so we actually need to go inside of our BIOS in order to turn that on.